that Green Shores for Homes is front-loaded with planning and incorporates a green approach. Therefore, the permit process will take less county staff time. I'm doing Green Shores for Homes as half of my job, and I'm doing improving permit process as another half. And as part of that other half, our county staff really wants to see everybody. We're debating, do we, such as LID, or alternatives to hard armoring, the soft approaches. They expand their business scope and may get more contracts. In this way, Green Shores for Homes supports local economies. Next. So we've covered projects that don't yet have permits. What about projects that already do? Well, I put a question mark after the first incentive, information, technical assistance, and cost share. Maybe not, depending on how far along they are in the process. And we can pretty much likely cross off a streamlined permit process. They already have their permit, and a reduction or rebate for permit fees. So that leaves the two last categories: tax reduction through the public benefit rating system, and property value increases due to green certification. So those last two apply to all projects. Next. So I'm working with the San Juan County assessor at the local level to explore developing a public benefit rating system category for shoreline properties. And right now in the San Juans we have ag open space, forest, and open space, I think, are the major four. Tina Whitman could correct me on that if anyone's interested. A couple of challenges have risen to the top. Giving a tax break, this one's classic. Giving a tax break means a revenue loss to the county. This loss is spread out among all other properties. So some folks are saying, why should my taxes increase so wealthy shoreline property owners get to remove an old bulkhead and landscape their shoreline with native vegetation? So that's a question. Secondly, in order to add a public benefit rating system category, the county must open up the whole system, which might have unintended consequences, such as the whole system being thrown out. So we don't have one in San Juan County anymore. So shoreline property owners really do like the idea of saving money on their taxes when they do the right thing. So this is one of those areas where we really need support at the regional level. As Todd House was mentioning, Action 1.3.1 is forming a work group that's looking at tax-based incentives, and hallelujah, because my assessor would love it if we did that. So next, I've saved my favorite incentive for last. Ben Kaufman of Greenworks Realty in Seattle co-authored a paper, and the title is in blue, Assessing the Market Impacts of Third-Party Certification on Residential Properties, which shows that properties with any type of green certification, LEED, Built Green, or Green Shores for Homes, sell for more. Similar studies have been done showing an increased range of 7 to 18%.
Process, which is a little different if it's in a city or a county, but it's a well-defined process. And there's a public hearing in the sense that it's, people can come and make comment, and then there's a formal approval. The following year, the assessed value is then is reduced for that part of their land, resulting in a tax reduction, and this is managed by the county assessor's office. Next slide. So I'm going to go through 3 examples to give you on-the-ground dollar amounts. So the first example is a property in Thurston County where 15 acres of the total 16-acre site, so the 1 acre around the home was excluded, but the 15 additional acres were put into the program, and that resulted, I'm trying to show you these really different dollar amounts, so kind of pay attention. So this is 15 acres, and they're going to spend $2,004 on their annual taxes for that part of their property versus $2,041. And in that case, it qualified for a 90% reduction of their taxes. It was a 5 points plus a conservation easement in Thurston County's program. Okay? Now I'm going to go higher value land, and they are going to only pay $23.42 versus $55 for their annual tax bill, and that was only a 60% reduction, 15 points on King County. They might have been able to, do other things and get more points. What happened?
Don't worry.
If you can hit next, you'll see the dollar amount. Sorry, I'm going fast on my computer, so you're doing great. Okay, next. So in Puget Sound, and this is what you see on the handout that I gave you, there are 9 of the 12 counties that have existing public benefit rating systems. And so the challenges in some of the existing systems are, many of them require a 5-acre minimum. So for a shoreline property, that's a challenge. There's an emphasis in the way the program is done on square foot. So if you're only taking out a bulkhead, that's not a lot of square foot. So we do need to figure out how to deal with that. And a lot of the counties do require a public access requirement. And so that's a challenge as well, or some of the counties. And to make the change, we're going to need to deal with as
into the program. So the map that you see in front of you, you've heard about the public benefit rating system. It's a great introduction. I should note that its use in terms of environmental protection has really been kind of surfacing since the mid-90s, I would guess. It was really looked at as being a great tool that we might be able to affect better watershed conservation and improvement with. The fact that it is kind of revenue neutral for the jurisdictions that are applying it is probably a good piece of a good element to consider. The map that you see here represents a tax code area map. When the public benefit rating system is used and that tax reduction is granted, then those taxes that are not being paid by the property owner do get dispersed among the community, but it's not county-wide or jurisdiction-wide. It's really just within a particular tax code area. So you think of a tax code almost like an area code or a zip code. Those different colors that you see on this map of the north part of Kitsap County really represent kind of the overlay of a number of different taxing districts in a particular area. So it might be a local government, it might include a school district to take out their bulkhead. Could you actually then assess that piece of property lower than its current use, which would be residential in the case of a shoreline with a private property owner? So there's some problems with the public benefit rating system that's set up today, and one of the things that the regulatory subcommittee is looking at is maybe there's a model that needs to be developed. Maybe it's new legislation, maybe it's kind of revisions that various jurisdictions that currently have a public benefit rating system set up that they can just kind of plug and play. The other aspect of this is with the regional level support, administering the program is going to be a tricky proposition. Most of the jurisdictions kind of have their systems in place already. And so when you start trying to introduce this stuff, there's kind of a learning curve that has to go along. So one of the things we've been talking about in the Ecosystem Coordination Board Subcommittee is to really start with one of those pilot programs. Actually work with those local jurisdictions to set up a system that's efficient and effective for going out and assessing those properties, whether it's part of a public benefit rating system or whether it's some new legislation that authorizes counties to go out and provide some kind of
really want to, you could pull up the Snohomish MRC website and click on the Port Susan link, which will give you a nice map if people want to look at that. I was supposed to be in Italy today, so I didn't know I was coming here until Friday, so that's why I don't have slides. But that doesn't really matter because we're just here today to give you guys an overview of what we've been doing in Snohomish County in partnership with the Northwest Straits Commission. And one of the big projects our Snohomish County Marine Resource Committee has been working on is to create a marine stewardship area in Port Susan. Who here has been to or heard of Port Susan? Wow, awesome. Well, I don't know that I should go into a lot of detail, but it's a really special place. The Nature Conservancy designated it as one of the highest areas of biodiversity in Washington State. And so Snohomish County MRC, in partnership with the Tulalip tribes and a host of other partners, came together to create a conservation action plan, which is a primary issue to focus on, and wanted to figure out ways, look, there's our website, figure out ways to address that issue in the local level. You know, Port Susan is in Snohomish County. It's just north of sort of the end of the urban corridor from Everett all the way down south to where we are now, and it's sort of in the pathway of future development. And so we really felt that we had an opportunity here to put some programs in place and to promote stewardship in a proactive way rather than waiting till things had gotten too far to protect. So with that, after we developed the Conservation Action Plan, we worked with the Northwest Straits Foundation to apply for a grant from the Marine and Nearshore LO to develop a targeted awareness program for Port Susan to prevent shoreline armoring. And what that entailed was doing several different things. We did, look, a beautiful map, thank you, Nicole. So what that entailed was several different.
This is not salmon habitat, it's erosion, by far. The number one value was also not salmon habitat, it was the view. So knowing that, we then went on to Island and Snohomish counties and we did a pre-survey of property owners that was linked to their workshop registration. So if you want to come to this workshop, you got to answer these questions, which gave us a relatively high response rate in our survey work. And we found again that the number one concern for coastal property owners is erosion, resoundingly so. We also asked questions though about, well, where would you like to, where would you hear these messages best? What are your trusted sources of information? And those trusted sources are not people who work for the government. Who knew? Your trusted sources of information, especially around technical and scientific information, are actually private consultants, Andrea. Who knew? So private consultants were other technical experts. So folks who are not viewed in a regulatory role, and I found this with other survey work that I've done in other kinds of public education and outreach projects, folks are leery of a bulkhead or other shore structure. So if they had a failing bulkhead or needed to do some upcoming maintenance, they were contemplating putting in some sort of additional structure to augment their existing structure, like a stairway that's going to go over the bulkhead because they built a bulkhead and made it hard to get to the beach, you know, that those folks are much more likely to be able to internalize those messages and act upon them within a reasonably short time frame. And then lastly, we had folks who might one day make a choice, and if we had space, we would certainly offer them that technical information, but they were not our priority folks. So then we went out, we talked to them. I will tell you, we don't have final evaluative data yet because we're still winding up the program. The last of our site visits are actually scheduled for October. Folks had the opportunity to have a coastal geologist or a vegetation management specialist. So in some places, depending upon questions we would ask the property owner when scheduling about the nature of their property and the nature of the erosional forces, are they high bank, low bank, medium bank, high wave energy, similar, you know, that we're going to end up with different approaches for different audiences and different geographies within the Salish Sea. The other thing that I think was a missed opportunity was that we didn't really message about how a natural shoreline could help with resilience during a time of rising sea levels. And so we talked a lot about, you know, storms and erosion, but we really didn't talk about a sea level rise in a meaningful way. And I think that was a little bit of a missed opportunity for us, but we'll keep going in future with as we expand this program. We received some private funding to expand it to Island and Jefferson counties, so we'll keep you posted.
No, I don't have slides.
Do you want me to find something on the internet?
Sure. Sure. You can put the King City website if you'd like.
What is it?
Pictures.
Yeah, that one too, that would work. www.kingcd.org. Since we need a visual aid. Good morning, my name is Brandy Reed. I'm from the King Conservation District. I know many of the faces in the audience and some not. I am here today to talk to you very briefly about a King Conservation District program called Where the Water Begins, Land and Water Stewardship for Marine Shoreline and Marine Bluff Property Owners. This is a program that has been in place since 2006, and before I get started, I would just like to ask Elliot Menashe, Pete Landry, Colin Higgins to just stand up for a second, please, and ask the audience to take note that these are Our major partners in the program, Greenbelt Consulting, King County DNRP, and Snow Isle Civic Engineering, Environmental Engineering. As well, Nicole and Sea Grant, Jim Brennan were instrumental partners early on in 2006. So today I'm just going to quickly give you an overview of the program. I was asked to discuss briefly pros and cons associated that we've become aware of, and 4,500 landowners that I directly mail to every year. Maybe just I'll say that I've had to take the last 2 years off on the workshop. I'll explain why in a minute. So each year I did that direct mailing, offered these workshops. Elliot, Pete, Colin, Jim would come help do the workshops. And then, and in the workshops, we would talk about all of these sort of resource management topics that have been mentioned by previous members. We're looking at marine and nearshore ecology issues, coastal geological processes, vegetation management, and how vegetation management is an asset to the landowner, not only in terms of habitat, but also in terms of dealing with their primary issue, which is erosion, shoreline erosion and bluff stabilization. That holds true in King as well with those landowners. So we go through that material in the workshop, and I get them to the workshop by saying, hey, is this your concern? I'm unabashed. I just say, hey, you're worried about shoreline erosion? Come to this workshop. We got some great information for you. Because I know that's what they're interested in. That's the hook for them. We do the workshop, and at the workshop, I let them know that they have a free technical assessment, free site visit available to them, where we can come out and we can do a site-specific assessment of the resource concerns on their property, specifically the resource concerns as we've discussed in the workshop. And I'd say 90% of those landowners take us up on volunteering to have us come to their property and do a site visit with them. And then what I also tell them is that the sort of nascent part of the program that we're still trying to flesh out is this financial incentives model. How do we get financial incentives in place to help them take the actions, take action in the ways that we are espousing that they take action in the workshops. So the program is all of those pieces, you know, how that translates to the total body, but certainly not everyone who has a bulkhead is automatically on board with removing the bulkhead. No surprise. And then I just want to just leave with you a couple of things, a couple thoughts. One is that King CD is actively engaged in a stakeholder involvement process. Kathy Minch from State of Seattle is part of that process. We're looking at the local funding source that is the Conservation District's funding mechanism, and whether or not that funding mechanism can be brought to bear to address this issue among many other issues that are a priority in King County. So more to come on that. If you're interested, just stay in touch with us and we'll let you know how that's panning out. And then the second thing that I want to sort of leave with you is that there's 12 Puget Sound Conservation Districts. And I just recognized Aaron from Pierce CD sitting in the audience, right? No? Yes. And King CD is not the only conservation district that is doing a marine shoreline program. And all 12 Puget Sound Conservation Districts are engaging in a process to develop regional scopes of work for core programs and services, of which shoreline protection and enhancement is one of them. We're focused on marine and freshwater, so more to come on that in terms of a regional sort of service delivery model for shoreline landowner assistance. Thank you.
All right, we're going to shift a little bit direction again, and we're going to start with Dave Ward from the partnership, and he's going to bring together with a couple of other folks, and I'll let you go ahead and do the introduction. We're going to talk about social marketing and how that is being used as a way to look for the incentives that are going to work for these kinds of issues. Again, remember, hold questions, and then the other thing to remember is the purpose for this is to bring people together, to cross over and connect. We have time this afternoon for people to meet, to talk about issues where you have something in common. So keep that in mind for later this afternoon. Okay, Dave.
Thank you. Could you bring up YouTube, please, and do kitties and puppies?
All over it.
I think it's the
We should have a couple of slides
I think
there.
it's the fourth one, Nicole.
So I was invited to speak briefly about social marketing and what social marketing is and what the role that social marketing can play in shoreline management could be. And so I'm just going to do an introduction, and then I'm going to pass it off to Maggie and Pat, who are going to give a little bit more in-depth description of a program that they have in progress right now. And so the first question that I have for all of you is, who knows what social marketing is? Raise your hand. We have a well-educated audience. Who here believes that social marketing is a dating service? We got one back there. Nancy Lee is sitting right here, the guru of social marketing, in pushing social marketing forward as a methodology, as a field of expertise to move behavior change. And the reason is this, because if we look on this slide here, this curve is known as the diffusion curve. And what this curve is showing is the way innovations and technologies and behavior patterns are adopted by society. So we have this cluster of people on the left side here who are the innovators. These are the people who will seek out information about these things that they're really interested in. And these are the people who will go and they'll learn what they can, they'll immerse themselves in a subject, and then they'll go and they'll do something. And then in the middle, there's what's called the early and the late majority, the high part of the bell curve. And these are the people that are like most people that live in our region. Remember, everybody in this room on this subject matter, you're an innovator. You are on the extreme left-hand side of this curve if you're sitting in this room here today. Most of the 4.5 million residents of the Puget Sound region are in that center part. They're in that bell curve. And these are people who really aren't going out and seeking information about these kinds of subjects. Most of these people are they're not looking for a website, they're not going to the county website to learn about how I can improve my shorelines. Most of them, they like salmon when it comes to them on the dinner plate. It's kind of an iconic thing for the Pacific Northwest, but it's really not in the front of their brains. They're not thinking about it today like you and I are. So these are people that we really need to reach out to. And their motivations, I think in one of the previous speakers, I forgot who it was talking about how landowner motivations, shoreline landowner motivations are very different than ours. We care about salmon, we care about forage fish, we care about herring, spawning habitat. Most landowners don't. They want their view. They're worried about how much are they paying in taxes. They're worried about other things. And so that's what the middle of this bell curve looks like. That's the bulk of the population. On the far end are these people that we refer to as the laggards. And social marketing is a behavior change method. It's a method of changing behaviors. Historically, it's been used in environments and public health where we had a huge body of research behind some of these public health issues that was defining exactly what the behavior is that we actually want people to do. If we're trying to control sexually transmitted diseases, a huge body of research says, okay, well, condoms is a good way to do that. So let's develop a program to get people to use condoms. If we want to have a public safety campaign about, say, speeding, reducing highway accidents, well, there's a huge body of literature that correlates highway speeds to accident fatalities. Okay, well, let's try to get people to slow down a little bit. How do we make that happen? So the social marketing is a method of getting to those ends. The challenge that we have in natural resources has been that we typically don't have as well refined a list with this huge body of research behind it. So we're still stuck in a mode where when we go knocking on a door to a landowner, we have a list of 150 best management practices that we want them to do. And we want them to do it for salmon, not for the things that they care about. So we get the door closed in our face a lot, and sometimes we don't even realize when we've been blocked out. So we have a body of precursor work that needs to happen before we actually even begin to implement what is called the social marketing process. Some of this is defining the scope. Defining the problem and its priority against all the other problems. What's the scope and scale and volume? What's our confidence in the science? What is the science actually telling us about the problem? Can I have a show of hands? How many of you know how many shoreline properties we have in Puget Sound? One hand? Two hands? Okay, I'll make it a little bit easier. How many of you know how many shoreline properties you have in your county? Okay, a couple. Picture social matrix that we're all working within, but we often fail to pay attention to how are people actually processing lifelong decisions like stages of change and diffusion of innovations theory. And then we also have behavioral economics. We've had a lot of talk about incentives today, a lot of talk about how people are processing decisions and how people do individual actions. There's a whole body of science called behavioral economics that looks specifically at how do individual people process individual decisions, like deciding whether an incentive is going to work for them or not, whether a tax break is going to work for them or not. And if you don't think that this is important to pay attention to, I want to just remind everybody that right now we have an administration in Washington, D.C., sitting in the White House that is implementing entire nationwide programs using behavioral economics as the background for to ask how do people process these decisions. Every time you hear the word Obamacare, they're using behavioral economics to process how do people enroll in this program. Maggie? Yeah.
Thanks, Dave. That was a great introduction to social marketing, and that works in really well with what Maggie's going to be talking about in a minute. My name is Patricia Yachak, and I work with the Department of Fish and Wildlife, and I'm the grant program manager for the Marine and Nearshore Lead Organization, along with Maggie McEwen from DNR, and then Derek Day of our staff, who is also here today. So I just wanted to, I'm just going to step in for a minute or two here before Maggie talks about the social marketing project that we're undertaking to look at the barriers and motivators to get private shoreline landowners to remove or reduce the shoreline armoring that they have. So I just wanted to give a little context for how our program got there and what some of the other projects we're working on that kind of build around and fit in with that seem to fall under the funding radar was beach restoration. So we kind of landed on that as our next area of investment for habitat protection and restoration. And working with ESRP and RCO, we now have about 8 projects underway or beginning to be underway that are going to be working on beach restoration, either armor removal or design projects for armor removal. Those projects are listed on the sheet. Also, our webpage has a full list of our projects and a little summary of each project we funded, including some you've heard about here today. In the future, we also heard when we were developing our work plan for next year that people were still interested in, well, you can do all this other stuff with incentives and voluntary things, but we really need protection on the ground. So we've also dedicated some more resources to providing some permanent protections there of high priority habitat. In the tools and resources area, working with FeatureWise to enhance and further develop some work on the incentives that they've done so that we can have this as a resource available for all of you guys who are working on those programs in your area. The social marketing strategy that Maggie will talk about next. A new area that we haven't started very much work on yet, we're just beginning to scope, is doing some sort of public education and outreach on the importance of beaches, and sort of letting people know about, why it's important to, remove armoring or not put in armoring. So again, I know some of you in this room have probably done work in that area and will be hopefully in contact with you. In terms of getting more information on what's happening in compliance in the shorelines, we have a small project going on right now to assess and analyze existing information on compliance and enforcement of shoreline regulations. And then a couple of information gap projects that we're doing is funding a project to complete the mapping of the Puget Sound feeder bluffs and develop marine shoreline design guidelines. And so a lot of this work is leading up to a couple of big investments that we're going to have starting next spring, or late winter, early spring. So there'll be funding available to local governments to work on projects, well, local governments and others, to work on projects that use some of that data from that compliance assessment to do projects in their areas to improve compliance with regulations. And then also we'll be funding programs to use the incentives, the social marketing strategies, and so on for folks to start or enhance programs in their areas. So now I'll turn over to Maggie to talk about the actual social marketing project.
So, hey guys, there's chairs up here. This is informal, so please come forward. I see some of you guys standing in the back, and there's all sorts of chairs up here. So please come.
Heather doesn't bite.
Okay, well, as Patricia mentioned, I'm going to talk to you about one of the ways that we're working to address development along the shoreline, and that's our social marketing project. It is also exploring, in addition to many of the great projects you've heard today, how we can effectively motivate residential landowners along the marine shorelines of Puget Sound to choose alternatives to armoring, removing armoring, forgoing armoring, or choosing softer alternatives. We wanted to better understand what drives landowner decisions around armoring so that we can help them by providing incentives and giving them the support that they need to choose something better. Thanks. I should have known. Thank you, sorry. For Puget Sound.
See if that helps.
Okay. Region-wide, we want this information to support local governments and others in working in these areas region-wide. So ultimately our goal, as with all of us, is to contribute to that net decrease in armoring across the shorelines. So this project will be complete next year, and it'll be a tool and resources for local governments and others who want to expand an existing incentive program or start a new incentive program. And next year, our grant program will have a funding opportunity. We have about $1.5 million next year that we want to invest in incentive programs, expanding existing programs, or initiating new programs that are targeting marine shoreline armoring and a reduction and selection of alternatives to traditional armoring. So today we're hoping to not only tell you about our project, but also get your input as people who are all working on these issues about how we can make these resources and these tools as effective as possible for you. You know, what can we do to really support the need that you have? So I'm going to walk very quickly through what our project will do, but I wanted to mention a couple things. We're very much trying to build on all the great work that is being done along the shorelines that you've heard about this morning, and also the input that we've been getting from people who are working with landowners in many different arenas. So we're really trying to build off of all of the great work that's being done, and our intent is to provide a well-researched set of tools and resources that we can provide to the region to support incentive programs that can be tailored to the unique communities across Puget Sound. We understand that all the communities around our region are different, so we want to have a range of options for people. So next slide, please. So our project is being led by a great team. The project lead is Kolar plus Cohen, and I'm going to talk about 5 elements of the project just really briefly. First, in the project, the team is gathering existing data about all the residential shoreline parcels along Puget Sound, information such as the natural features of the parcel. Is it rocky, pocket beach, feeder bluff, whether it has armoring, what the erosion potential is, size of the parcels, how developed they are. That's a parcel level set of information that'll be in GIS format. And it'll help us think about the parcel types that might be a good fit for using alternatives to armoring. And we'll be thinking about those groups of parcel types as our audience segments. So, you know, what groups might be sort of most ready to use incentives, accept incentives to remove shoreline armoring or forgo armoring. So for example, one of our audience segments might be mid-sized parcels that are located in pocket beaches and are somewhat developed and currently have armoring. So we're trying to think about all of the shoreline parcels in these groups that we can design different strategies for. So as a side note, we know that offering incentives is not going to work for everyone and every parcel, but we are trying to find places where where there are alternatives that are options for landowners and figure out the best ways that we can support and encourage landowners to take action. So next slide. The next piece of the project is to identify what alternatives to armoring we might want to encourage. We want to pretty specifically describe what are the things that we might want to encourage for landowners to do, so that when we're talking to them and gathering feedback, we can be very specific about what we want to do. So for example, for parcels that have a home and armoring and low erosion potential, we might want landowners to consider adding native vegetation, removing part or all of their armoring, and visiting with a coastal professional to design for their site what'll work best. I mentioned that we're developing this parcel level information across the shoreline. It's not going to indicate on a parcel by parcel basis exactly what a landowner should do. It's not going to say that they should place wood here and whatnot, because that depends on factors like where is the house. But it will help us explore the different behaviors that could be suitable for the different parcel types, the different audiences that we'll be targeting. Next slide, please. So the third part is we're going to gather information from landowners about their barriers, what's preventing them from really taking action, taking that final step, and what are their motivators, what would lead them to take that action that we really want to see. The team will be conducting a survey with property owners. In addition to compiling the existing survey information that is available, trying to get a sense from landowners about their barriers and motivators, conducting in-depth interviews with landowners, and also interviewing people who work with landowners that influence them, such as contractors and realtors. Next slide, please. Given all of the information, the team will identify the best ways to reach and motivate the different audience segments that we've chosen to pursue or develop strategies for, and they may be focusing on a set that are really seem most ready to take action. And the team will be thinking about, for each of those segments, describing what incentives will be effective and what would be needed to really support that behavior change. Developing creative and effective messages that catch attention and motivate action. Creating a look and feel and materials for a program that'll be resources that future implementers could use in implementing a program. And then they'll recommend where the strategies might best reach landowners and effective ways to reach out to landowners. So they'll be testing some of these recommendations with landowners and also with future implementers to make sure that they really resonate and are effective. So next slide, thanks. They're going to bring it all together and create a how-to guide for implementers and develop an evaluation plan. And it'll include things like tips on planning and executing the strategies and ways that we could measure how successful the programs are as they're being implemented to see if we're achieving our outcomes. So again, we wanted to develop tools and resources that would be available for the whole region and continue to support all the great work that's been done on incentives around the region. This project, as I mentioned, will be finished in early next year, and it'll be available to everyone. It'll be, all of the results of the project will be pulled together into a report format, and we'll also be able to provide the parcel level database, GIS database that I mentioned, to other governments, and that'll be a useful tool in outreach and implementing incentive programs. And as I also mentioned, we'll have grant opportunities next year for entities who would like to expand their existing incentive program or start a new incentive program and building on some of these tools and strategies that are available through our social marketing project. So this meeting is a great opportunity for us to not only tell you about this, but to get your input. Really looking forward to the discussion about how can we make this as useful as possible to you in the work that you do with landowners. And if there's anything that you can think of that would also be a helpful piece, please do let us know, because we're early in the project and we want to make this something that's